Due Process, winner of 25 regional Emmy Awards. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers University, Newark, and Rutgers Law School in Newark.
There are about 250 kids who are incarcerated in the whole state of New Jersey, but 13 of those kids are white. 13. And what that speaks to is a racially discriminatory response to some kids, particularly of color, when they commit crime, as opposed to the way in which white kids are treated when they commit crime.
And so a movement's afoot to transform our entire system of juvenile justice, beginning with the closing of the Jamesburg Youth Prison after 150 years.
150 years!
The fight for juvenile justice reform on this edition of Due Process. Do we throw away our children or only someone else's children? Is our system of juvenile justice designed to rehabilitate, reintegrate, rescue? And is it evenly applied? I'm Sandra King, and on this edition of Due Process, what role do race and class play in determining which kids the system embraces and which it sees as threatening, expendable? We begin with some expert analysis from Professor Laura Cohen, director of the Criminal and Youth Justice Clinic here at Rutgers Law School.
Youth in New Jersey serve incredibly long sentences, much longer than they do in almost any other state.
The vast majority of those kids, urban and black, their numbers widely disproportionate to either the population or their rate of crime.
We know that New Jersey has the highest disparities, racial disparities, in the country.
And Professor Laura Cohen, who heads the Juvenile Justice Clinic at Rutgers Law School,
It is a huge waste of public resources. It's a waste, more importantly, of human life.
says that disparity cries out for reform.
The system from the very beginning treats white youth differently. So white youth are less likely to be arrested in the first place. The decision-making process with regard to whether to arrest or not
They down there.
is very different depending on where you live and what you look like.
And the disparate treatment continues, she says, through how you're prosecuted, how you're sentenced, how long you serve, and where.
Nobody should be in the center with me.
Do you wind up in a community-based group home,
Is this a bath?
like one we visited in Camden years ago,
I didn't even know you could do that anymore.
or in the state's secure facility for boys, the juvenile jail at Jamesburg?
150 years is enough? 150 years?
95% of kids who are locked up here are black,
Brothers, you matter to us.
at a cost of more than $250,000 per kid per year. More than an Ivy League education.
Much more per year, much more than 4 years of an Ivy League education. And that youth coming out of these places reoffend at a rate that exceeds 80%. So we know we're buying a whole lot of failure for a whole lot of money.
One reason the outgoing governor said yes to finally shutting the place down, but to be replaced with what?
And so what I would hope is that as the state moves forward with the plan to close Jamesburg, it thinks about a number of things. It doesn't just think about building. It has to think about creating a continuum of both pre and post court involvement, supervision, and treatment for youth that takes into account, number one, everything we know about what works and what doesn't work.
New Jersey, since the turn of the last century, has made some moves in that direction, reducing the number of incarcerated kids at both the state and county level by over 50%. Fewer spend time in pretrial detention
Stolen car.
or end up in secure facilities. How long you been here?
2 weeks.
What are you here for?
Murder.
County lockups used to be crowded with kids awaiting trial for nonviolent crime, usually drugs. Professor Cohen says that's changed.
The emphasis with cases that are just about substance abuse has been to try to keep those kids either in their homes, in outpatient programs, or in some relatively short-term non-JJC drug treatment program.
When they get ready maybe to mug an old lady or to shoot someone, they'll say, oh, no, I don't want to go back there.
And there's been other progress, too, since the bullhorn ruled at an abusive, overcrowded Essex youth house.
His hair is going to be cut by whatever means necessary. And I might state, our barber doesn't see too well.
Or when martial rule reigned at New Jersey's now closed juvenile boot camp. But the numbers detained or imprisoned, separated from their families in a facility ill-designed for rehabilitation, are still, she says, much too high.
The number of youth who really cannot be made safe in the community is such a small fraction, even of the youth that we continue to incarcerate, and certainly of the youth who were incarcerated, at the beginning of this century.
Still, the school-to-prison pipeline is now an urban institution, criminalizing black kids, beginning with a very different school experience than their white suburban counterparts.
It plays out with the quickness of some districts, of some schools to suspend. It plays out with regard to the presence of police in schools. Schools in suburban communities are not staffed in the same way by school security officers.
And they don't have metal detectors and security cameras.
I'll take your IDs out, please.
And daily bag and body searches.
What you got in there, man?
All of those things that send the message that you are not to be trusted, and that message is sent to them from the time they're in kindergarten.
A message later reinforced in encounters with police and courts and the entire ineffective system of juvenile justice.
Every single time a young person is removed from his home and incarcerated, that should be a moment of crisis. It should be a moment of seriousness of purpose. It should be a moment that is not, that we don't reach without careful consideration and elimination of every other possibility.
And we'll explore the crisis in juvenile justice with a law professor and a Baptist preacher who've worked, each in his own way, on making that system better. But first, the problem of Jamesburg, the state's ineffective and expensive youth prison, and Andrea McChristian, Associate Counsel of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, a leader in the successful fight to get that dinosaur shut down. How did you manage to do it? It took quite a while and quite a bit of effort.
Sure, thanks for having me, Sandy. So at the front end, we've released a report called Bring Our Children Home, Ain't I a Child, that laid out all the reasons the youth justice system is a failed experiment. That led to, on June of last year, us standing with almost 400 partners, staying in front of Jamesburg on its 150th anniversary, saying 150 years.
150-year-old building is where we were still keeping kids.
150 years old. We stood outside June 28th, 2017.
And not many kids. So that you wound up spending an enormous amount of money, the state did, for each of these children who were in this old prison-like building.
Sure. Across our 3 youth prisons, the state was spending about $250,000 each year to house each child in these youth prisons that, as you mentioned, are at half capacity. Jamesburg itself houses 330, was only housing about 150, so paying millions of dollars to a facility that was largely empty.
So do you think that that's how you managed to win this fight, with the economic argument?
I think it was a number of things. I think it was the economic argument. I think it was the horrible racial disparities we see, where we're number 1 in black-white youth incarceration disparity, number 2
Yeah, but
in
that
Latino
wouldn't have
white.
gotten Jamesburg closed.
Sure. No, well, I'm saying I think it was a campaign built on the facts, built on the racial disparities, built on the economics. I think in addition to the research, we had a strong advocacy wing where we partnered with over 400 people in front of Jamesburg on that day to say 150 years was enough. We worked and talked with legislators. We talked with the elected officials. We talked with the Attorney General, Chris Perino, who was a wonderful partner in advocating for the closure. And so it was a really holistic, multifaceted campaign to close Jamesburg and Hayes.
And how did you get Chris Christie on board?
Sure. So I think with that, it really was both the optics of the campaign moving along, but as I said, it was really Attorney General Perino, who we talked with, who we worked with, who really took this as his kind of laboring oar to say, with him, the financial issues, the racial disparities, et cetera, this is something that before I leave, I want to make sure that these are no longer existing.
So you think he was able to influence the then governor?
I think he was definitely an important piece of the puzzle. I think in addition, our conversations with legislators, our conversations with advocates, partners, members of our coalition, Youth Justice New Jersey, we were able to have a kind of a holistic approach to pushing every single pressure point we could to close it.
So Andrea, what comes next?
Sure. Well, on the other side of this, with the announcement, we, one, have to make sure the facilities are actually closed. We have to enact a timeline.
And when is that supposed to happen?
That's the issue. There was the announcement, which was wonderful, but on the other side of this, what we propose is a commission actually to be created to set out a timeline for when these facilities will be closed and what these two new facilities will look like. As piece and parcel of that, we also are advocating for a third facility to be built in the northern region so that we can have a northern, central, and southern facility that are easy access for our young people's families.
And is it your idea that people would be placed according to where their families are?
Well, hopefully, we always, in every instance, we want to keep the kids in the community in the first instance, in treatment and intensive wraparound services. If they do need to be in an out-of-home placement, it should be near important family connections because, as we all know, it is imperative that there's family and community support for a young person's true rehabilitation.
You said there were how many kids left in Jamesburg?
There are about 250 children left across the three youth prisons. Within Jamesburg, there's about 150 or so.
And are you, as somebody who's studied all of this, are you convinced that those children all need to be in a really secure facility?
No, absolutely not. And what's interesting, Sandy, is that in addition to the 3 youth prisons, there's 11 non-secure facilities that the JJC also runs. These facilities are half empty, and these kids are moved between the youth prisons and the non-secure facilities. So if you can move a child down, then that means they don't need to be in something like Jamesburg.
It'll be interesting to see how it all goes. Andrea, grateful to have you here, and we will be right back with more on juvenile justice and injustice.
150 years is enough. 150 years. Thank you so much.
And with me now, two good and worthy friends, both fighters for greater fairness and compassion, including the way we do juvenile justice. Bill Howard has led the National Council of Churches, the New York Theological Seminary, and the Rutgers Board of Governors, but it was as pastor of Newark's Bethany Baptist Church that he made his mark on juvenile justice. Doug Eakley, a professor here at Rutgers Law School and chair of National Legal Services under Bill Clinton, now chairs the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice and a juvenile justice planning committee that advocates for reform. Thank you both for being here. And Doug, let me start with you. The order to close Jamesburg, it's a big victory for the Institute, but Jamesburg is just one piece of the reform that you're seeking.
Jamesburg is a part of what we call the deep end of the juvenile justice system. The front end starts with our schools and the so-called school-to-prison pipeline.
So what does that mean?
That means that all the way along from the first referral of a child to the tender, loving care of the juvenile justice system of one sort or another, we are failing our children and, in effect, abandoning them.
And Reverend Howard, the numbers are clear. There is a huge discrepancy between the number of black kids who wind up in that system and the number of white kids. Surely not by chance.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the evidence is not just here in New Jersey, but it's national. And it has a lot to do with race, but also with where black people and Latino people live, very often in the post-industrial cities where work has disappeared.
Determined in large part by race and class.
Exactly.
So What do we do about a problem that's become so institutionalized that most people who don't work on this issue would not even know what we're talking about? What do you mean? Kid gets in trouble, kid goes to juvenile court, kid might go to juvenile prison. Doug?
We have, through the Institute for Social Justice, but with a lot of collaboration from a lot of friends and new community partners, formed a Youth Justice New Jersey coalition that's seeking to address every segment of the juvenile justice system in New Jersey. And we have working groups looking at school to prison. We have working groups looking at conditions of confinement, education, treatment, and the like. And then we have the Close the Prisons coalition that's working on closing Jamesburg, Bordentown, and Hayes School for young women.
The easiest part, perhaps, of that list?
In a sense, and I see this in part because it's kind of happened, we have an announcement of closing of Jamesburg and Hayes, the economics of which I think were part of the major analytical
it just costs
effort.
So much per
It costs
child.
so much, and nothing is coming out of it except for misery and hardship and reoffending by kids who are not being prepared to lead productive lives.
But when you talk about the school to prison pipeline, you're talking about something very much more ingrained in the society, accepted at least by the majority population and sometimes by the minority population as well. And what do we do about that, Bill Howard?
Well, the pipeline starts long before school. It starts in the prenatal period. One of the things we see is how parents, even grandparents, are, ill-equipped to provide the kind of environment that might help a child thrive. And these beg the society to wrestle with much deeper questions than the kind of remedies that we still have to struggle to put in place, but they really aren't addressing the root cause.
And now we see threats even to programs for nutrition for kids.
Sure.
So what do we do, especially in this climate?
Well, I'm not sure. We fight this climate. We advocate for climate change of the better sort. Bill talked about root causes. We have to acknowledge that we have among the most segregated school systems in the United States that are doubly impacted by impoverished populations with very few role models, very few opportunities. There is implicit bias in the system. A lot of it just implicit but not intentional, so that when sentencing judges have a black youth to be sentenced, the likelihood is that that child will get a different and likely custodial sentence rather than a white child who is just as offending in his behavior.
We heard Laura Cohen talk about how at every point in the juvenile justice system, that attitude comes into play, maybe in many cases, without even consciousness of it. Police, judges, looking at a white kid and automatically having a kind of inclusive feeling, and looking at a black kid and seeing something foreign.
Well, part of it, if I can interrupt, Cindy.
Please.
I've talked to a number of judges about their sentencing decisions, and one of the things that affects a judicial decision to send a kid to Jamesburg or Bordentown rather than home is whether or not there's a father who showed up at sentencing with a child, or even any parent who showed up, whether there are home circumstances that can cushion and correct and really guide.
So instead, institutionalize a kid?
Yeah, and institutionalize a kid in prison-like facilities where they receive virtually no meaningful education, treatment, counseling, or preparation to leave.
All of these things that institutions, perhaps as a last resort, wind up trying to do are really the functions of families. When we brought the first 17 kids who enrolled in the Youth Turn program that you're familiar with, we found some glaring things about them that we weren't particularly looking for, and I mentioned this to Doug before. First of all, none of these young men knew the identities of their fathers. Not to say they were alienated, but they couldn't name them under the threat of death. None of them had eaten meals in the place where they slept before jail. They all had asthma. You can go right down the line and look at all the indices of social decay.
So what was it that you were trying to do? You have this rather elite congregation at that time, 2002, and you say to them, I'm going to bring in these most underprivileged children that we can find who've already proven themselves to be potentially a problem, and we're going to put them together with you, and you're going to like it. How'd you do?
Well, the truth is part of the problem that we face is a combination of race and class. And to some extent, the class dimension that exists in black communities has been informed by the internalization of racism within the very victimized community that we talk about. And this notion of most people, moving about trying to make it until tomorrow, they don't want to be pinned with this notion of the racial dimension. It is hard to pin down. We don't have a quick solution. We don't have a pill to take to solve it. But it can very well be the undoing of the American experiment. Because just as we think we have made some racial progress, it raises its ugly head again.
But what is it that you were trying to do with Youth Turn? You had 5 years of it.
Simply,
what were you
as
trying to
Doug
do?
has pointed out, there are so many deficiencies in the lives of these young people, which generally results in their being in prison. We were they were going to be released, their sentences were coming to a close pretty rapidly, and they would go out into the world
And go back
just
in.
as ill-prepared as they were.
And the chances that they'd make it, very small.
So these relatively middle-class people were simply asked, when I was confronted with all the reasons why we perhaps shouldn't do this, my simple response was not to discount their concerns, but to say, but we must do something. What is your suggestion?
And they ultimately bought it. It went on for 5 years. What did you accomplish?
Well, what did we accomplish? First of all, any type of project like this, my determination was, Doug, that the people in the congregation would come to terms with the complexity of this social crisis. We accomplished that because when the program ended, people wept.
But how did you do with the kids? Did it make a difference in their lives?
We had several kids who were killed during the time they were working with us. Some of them went on to youth build and did, I think, pretty well. We had a handful who went to Essex County College. And we have one young man who is now working for the juvenile justice system.
So you had some success. And
Yes.
Doug, with just a minute left, let me ask you, as you work on these problems, if Governor Murphy were to say to you, Doug, what are the 2 things we need to do? What would you say?
I would focus on the school to prison pipeline and tease out of that pipeline particular nodes where we can make a difference in turning the situation around.
20 seconds, what else?
Man, if I had a magic wand, I would eliminate segregated schools in our inner cities.
Well, that's a big order. And with so much still to say, we have got to leave it
Yes.
there. With my thanks to Bill Howard and Doug Eakley, and with hope that New Jersey's new governor will add reforming the system of youth justice to his list of state priorities. For producer Tanya Bentley and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Sandra King. See you next time.
almost 70% of our kids are serving their entire sentence. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that because these facilities are operating at half capacity, there's no pressure on the parole board to release anyone early. The biggest carrot is that if you behave, you'll be released early. And yet our clients go to the parole board every quarter. They go with good parole reports, they go with fabulous parole reports, and yet they're still not released. That system of rewards and punishments has to be something that kids can feel, and it has to be something that kids can trust. If people don't believe that they are receiving procedural justice, and especially if youth don't believe that they're receiving procedural justice, they reoffend more often and they reoffend more seriously. And there have been study after study that has established that.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and watch us on demand on YouTube.